Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Centered Therapist podcast. I'm Sindee Gozansky, your host, and I'm so glad that you joined me today. Today, I'm going to introduce you to a really special guest. His name is Gary Katz. Gary Katz is a psychotherapist and founded the Center for Intimacy Recovery in New York, which focuses primarily on intimacy and relationships. He has found that without a sense of intimacy with oneself, people can't fully experience intimacy with someone else. The Center for Intimacy Recovery helps clients find ways to have the intimacy and connection in life they are seeking, and to uncover the ways that they have learned to play it safe and protect their hearts, which at times can get in the way of intimacy. Prior to opening his practice, Gary worked in education for over 20 years as a rabbi. He has lots of other credentials that we'll talk about as we go through the podcast. The website is intimacyrecovery.com if you want to check it out as we start talking. And welcome, Gary. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you so much, Cindy, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Pleasure. Yes, me too. I love that you're going to talk about intimacy as our main topic today. It's huge for me, for my work, for my practice. I work a lot with couples and relationships. Everything is relational in our work as therapists, so this is going to apply to everybody. And you said you were open to sharing about your own background and how your journey led you to focus on intimacy in your practice. So maybe we could.
Yeah, yeah, I'd love to start there. I just want to say is the word intimacy has so much attached to it, I think, first of all. And um, that might, for many people, that might mean sex. In fact, I have many clients, as I'm sure you do, who don't even feel comfortable saying we had sex last night or I had sex with my partner last night. They say I was intimate or something. But so I certainly, our practice includes sex. And when we talk about intimacy, that's included. But really, maybe I thought I'd pause for a moment just to talk about what it means and then return to your question, if that's okay. Because
Yes.
that I think that'll help me to more directly answer your question. But to me, intimacy kind of overlaps with what I've heard you talk about on previous episodes when you use the term like heart centered. It's the ability to really be present with oneself first and then in turn with others. So, and what I mean by present is being able to be present with all of my parts, all aspects of me, the ones that I want to show on a podcast or an interview or a first date or social media where I want to put on my best parts, shiny parts. But then we all have other parts, which are parts that we don't even want to look at, that might be painful or make us cringe. Maybe my pettiness about things, maybe my envy, maybe the way I said something to someone and or things like that. So things I've done that I feel guilt or shame over. So intimacy to me means being able to acknowledge all of these different parts and see myself integrated in both the parts I really like and the parts I don't really like or I judge. And if I'm able to look at those parts of myself through that whole range and make peace or have awareness of all of them, I'm more likely to let someone else in to see them too. But if I'm not able to look at my own parts and all the parts of myself, I'm definitely not going to let you see them either. Because if I'm so ashamed of them, I'm never going to let someone else see them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's such a great way to explain it. And if we're really strong in judging our own parts that we're ashamed of or uncomfortable with, there's no way we're going to let somebody else see that.
correct. And also, we'll probably be judgy of other people too, because we do that
Mhm.
to ourselves. So that's why what you read in that little bio that you read was like intimacy starts with myself and only then with others. So that's kind of been my journey too, to come back to your question. Um, I feel like, I don't know if it's true or not, but I feel like my whole life I've craved connection and intimacy. Um, we were just talking about our backgrounds a little
Yes.
before this started, and I got married at a very young age, 19.
Oh, wow.
Um, and it was an arranged marriage through a religious community. Um, and what I really craved getting married that young was intimacy, but it was really intimacy of a family.
Mm,
I was not feeling connected at that time to my parents, my own family. I was very lonely and I craved connection and felt that if I, you know, find someone else who wants to be with me, then I'm okay, which doesn't work. It didn't
right,
work. And I
right.
don't think it works in general that I can feel okay based on someone else or something else. But
We look for somebody else to make us feel okay on the outside, that
correct.
external
Correct.
connection,
Yeah.
validation.
And, at 19, I had no way of knowing that that doesn't work. I also didn't want to hear it. If someone said that that may not work, I was like, I had the surety of a 19-year-old that knows that they're right and the rest of the world's wrong.
Mhm.
Um, and so, through sometimes success and sometimes failure, seeking ways to feel okay, essentially, to feel okay internally and to crave the connection that I was yearning for. And sometimes that was connection through romantic relationships, and many times also it's connection through mentors or or community or friends. Um, and I would say also in that process of while I was aware that I was yearning for it, I was also terrified of it. So it was simultaneous, like this yearning, please come close, and this push away. And, you know, as one of the gifts of relationships, although I think it's Richard Schwartz who calls his wife his tour mentor, that she gives him a tour of mentoring him. Like
Oh,
she takes him on a tour of where he needs to get mentored in life because she reflects back to him the way areas he needs to learn. But relationships are definitely, to me, the place where we learn the most about ourselves, and that was true for me, romantic or otherwise. And
mhm,
so um, I learned and uncovered and had told to me in various forms ways that I might have sent confusing messages because I was staying or acting or yearning to be closer, but I had all these ways I wasn't even aware of that I was avoiding intimacy. Myriad. And I feel like every few years, I still get hit in the back of the head. It feels like sometimes the new unraveling or new layer coming off of like, oh, and it's humbling. And
yes.
I think it's part of everybody's life as we evolve. Like, hopefully we're doing this recording on December 31st, 2024, New Year's Eve. So I
Yeah.
hope that on December 31st, 2025, I'm a different person than I was today. And I hope that today I'm a different person than I was this day last year. We hope each year as we stand at the precipice of either a new year or a new moment in life, a birthday or some other holiday, that we've evolved and grown. And so, but I think that that's the journey of intimacy, is with ourselves and with others, is to continue to discover more about ourselves because we're just so complex.
Mm, yeah. Gary, first, thank you so much for that beautiful wish that you just gave to everybody listening here, and something that hopefully we can all really take in and, you know, strive for and believe that we're worthy of that, of becoming different
Yeah.
people, next year, and that we can
Yeah.
see our growth, and that we can wish that for other people too, even people who might be difficult in our lives. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah. And I would say also at the same time, because I think there can be a mindset in the therapy world or the world of self-improvement or in religious worlds, which is about self-improvement, um, of that if I'm always trying to improve, if I always need to improve, there's something inherently lacking about me. And so I feel like it's like the message is really, I'm already okay and I want to grow more.
mhm,
So, because otherwise, I think it's easy to misinterpret all of these, a growth mindset, a mindset of self evolving and actualization with to internalize a negative message, which is like something's wrong with me. When
exactly.
really, I don't think, I've learned, I hope that nothing's wrong with any of us. We're not
Mm,
broken. We're not damage, all these adjectives that get thrown around, even in therapy worlds. I'm sure you've had clients come in, with those self-beliefs, and they're so limiting and to where they can get to if they really, because they've learned to believe these things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that takes me back to something that you were saying around sharing your story. And thank you for being so vulnerable with us. And it really helps us connect with you and connect with those parts of ourselves that we push away, or, like you said, that stubborn 19-year-old. That's great. We all have something like that within us.
Yeah.
I heard so much also that desire for connection, but also belonging. And maybe, you hinted at like something being a little off with how you felt connected or close or not so close with your family, and that desire for belonging with a partner, with friends, with community. Um, and that is a form of intimacy too, that is
Hmm.
very missing sometimes in our world today. So, this is really exactly where I'm hoping our conversation goes. I also want to say one other thing to therapists listening. There's a lot of parallel process here. So listen for that. Listen for what we need to do in terms of understanding intimacy with others and our own self of therapist work with our own understanding of ourselves and intimacy with ourselves.
Yeah, and for all the therapists, like one of the things that I've really wrestled with in the past year, um, is a sense of loneliness, because working in private practice, in essence, is lonely. Before the pandemic, maybe I'd see someone in the hallway or waiting for the bathroom, another clinician, or in the coffee room, if, because I was working in a space where I shared with several other clinicians. But with the evolution of telehealth and virtual therapy, it's even more. And
Yeah.
I went completely virtual after in the pandemic, and about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I felt for my own needs, not clinical, but just loneliness, like isolation, need for connection, to work in person with clinicians, with clients, but also to get together with clinicians. And I started hiring people at our practice who had 10 plus years of experience. I'm like, why are they applying to work at my
Tell
practice? They
me
could,
this.
yeah.
Yes.
And they all said the same thing, that they wanted to belong to something. They're
Mhm.
lonely. And so they have their own practices, but they wanted also to, like, we have group supervision every week. They wanted to belong and feel connected to something else. And when
Mhm.
they said that, it resonated with how I've felt. Um, and it's really kind of shifted my thinking also in terms of things to offer to the community of therapists. Like, we started a mental health professionals pickleball league in New York City, and got 40 people the first month, because there's
What?
this yearning for, it's not because of the pickleball craze, I don't think. I think it's the yearning of desire for connection and
Hmm.
social events. And now I see other places starting to also, like, creating some form of connection and community for therapists, because even though we're with people all day long, we're not real, we're with them in their world. We're stepping into their world.
Right.
And even if we work relationally, heart centered, like you talk about so much, it's still for them. We're
Still
filling
for
them up.
them. Right.
Yeah. And so it's
Yeah.
so important. I think, all this talk about burnout is related to this,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And um, first, how did you even get the idea for a pickleball
Uh,
group for
I
therapists?
wanted to do something with it. Well, I wanted to do something active. Like I said, I started working in person 2 days a week. So I live about an hour north of New York City. So I take a train in Monday morning. I work in my office, see clients in person. And Monday nights, I would either exercise in the city, have dinner with a friend, something connective and something I can't do back at home. So I wanted to find something at end of last spring that was a little active, not just
Mhm.
sitting and eating, but also connective. And I thought I'd like to play soccer, because I grew up playing soccer, but I knew that I couldn't get a lot of other therapists to do that. And so I called up an adult sports league and asked them, like, what's an activity that would appeal to the widest range of ages and athletic backgrounds? And they said pickleball. So I
Wow.
thought, let's just see what people do. And I blitzed out emails on all the listservs in the area. And it hit a nerve, and I was like, oh, people want connection, and we're not
Yes.
talking, and it's become this community. Like, we have a group chat, people reach out for help on cases, they referrals, office availability. Like, it's become this really beautiful thing. It's not and it's created networking, but it's not a networking dinner.
Hmm.
It's not a CE event where we're learning. It's like play. And
Yeah.
so I think being able to play and to be good or not be good, to be able to not feel judged, to kind of let your hair down and have connection and go out afterwards for a bite to eat or something. It's really resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah, that's so great. And of course, you're a certified sex therapist with on the board of ASECT and studied the Modern Sex Therapy Institute, and we have all of these other credentials, but that just highlights play. Play is so important. And
Yeah.
here you were able to like highlight something. I love that you just put it out there. Now it's creating even networking as well as play. And
Yeah.
that's that's wonderful.
And when you talk about, like, and I listen to, you talk about, um, the things that go into be a heart-centered therapist, like being present, belonging, play is all that, right? Like,
Mhm.
there's no kid who's sitting in the sandbox with their trucks or with their, you know, pail and shovel, and they're thinking, did I cover all the things I have to get done on my to-do list? Like, they're in the moment. They're not worried about yes earlier or later that day, you know.
Yeah.
Play, we're in the moment, and it's such a thing that as adults we become so serious because of all the responsibilities we have. We forget about even most people who get into like athletics, like running, all of a sudden it's about like, what's your time? Do you have the right gear? It becomes this whole thing that's just not kind of messy and creative and stuff like that. And in the moment, it becomes like we adultify it, I think, in a way,
Mm,
instead of just
true.
being playful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to go back on the intimacy topic, but before that, as you're talking about the play and being present in the moment, it reminds me so much of something I heard you discuss on another podcast, and it's so aligned with how I work that we have fabulous approaches and trainings and, techniques that we've learned. And so you're trained in somatic experiencing and AEDP and EMDR and things like that. And yet, when we're sitting with a client, we're really trying to be so present and trying to experience what is coming up in our connection, in that I thou connection. It's kind of old
Right.
fashioned, but
Right.
I still work that way. And then maybe we turn to some of those tools. But really, it also does mimic that present moment of play and being present and seeing like what's next. Because the kid in the sandbox doesn't necessarily know what's next.
Hmm.
And therapists don't know what's coming next.
Right. Right. And every time, every moment I'm thinking about like, what's the right way, what's the right modality, I'm not present,
Yeah.
and yeah. And so just really kind of tracking the moment and feeling it. That was the biggest thing I learned from my first supervisor as an intern was like to use my body, listen to how my body's reacting to the client. And when I was listening to you describe your approach of heart-centered therapy, I just remember like it happens often, but often I feel this pull in my body towards the client based on what is going on for them energetically, emotionally, like they're opening up. And that tells me usually like when to do something. I just follow what happens in my body. And literally I can feel myself start to like slide forward because
Right. We move
yeah.
forward, tracking the client and just staying with what's there. I call it staying close to the client.
Hmm.
And I don't know another way to describe it, but you have to figure out what it is for you, and you know when you're there because, like you said, everything else goes away. The to-do list is gone.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, as children, what we primarily want is to be seen, right? From the moment, that's how we develop our sense of self, from being seen by, like, I always picture like a baby on the changing table looking up, and the caregiver leans over and looks into their eyes, and you see the baby's eyes light up because they feel seen.
Mhm.
And we develop, and the little kid at the playground who falls and looks back to see if they're mother is looking at them when they see what happened. Like we so need to be seen. And I think we still need that as adults.
Yeah.
Whether, it evolves, it might be to be seen and desired by by someone sexually, or it could be to be seen in professional sense. It evolves into the adult world, but it's the same human need. And that to me is the same thing as the connection that you're talking about.
Yes. And so, Gary, is that part of how you define intimacy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like you were describing with the clients, they have the most profound changes, I think, when they really feel seen. But what did you call it? Close up? No,
Well, staying close to the client.
staying close, right? So when I'm staying close and it's like this energy going back and forth as a dyad between client and the therapist, and they might make a little face and I'll be like, oh, what just happened? And they
Yeah.
feel so seen. And also sometimes when I can tell them how I see them, and it rings authentically true to them, like, they have a good heart, and that they've all their life they've just wanted whatever it is like X. That to me, I've seen like a transformation, because they're being seen in their authentic self, without all the layers of shell or protection that either others put on them or they put on themselves. And they can just be without those layers in a safe place, because we've established safety and trust as a partnership. That's when I think the deepest intimacy happens between
Hmm.
two people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so beautiful. And it's profound. And it's profound work that we do when we can be aware of our own intimacy, our own obstacles to that, and then try to also help our clients.
Yeah. Yeah. But so in order for me to do that with someone else, and this goes back to your question about my own self, is like I had to do some of that work on my own. Like I think it's ongoing all the time. So I
Yeah.
can't say I did that work. I don't know that it's ever in the past tense, but I had to have enough. I couldn't take someone where had never been.
Yeah.
I still can't.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
You know what? And for our listeners, some of these concepts that Gary and I are talking about seem pretty trite and simple, and we are two older therapists, so to speak, and we are still saying these basic things. So really, you know, it's primary. It's what it's all about, really. And sometimes I think simplifying it can be the way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, every modality that I've learned has helped my practice. Um, but
Hmm.
if I don't have the ability to sit, like sometimes I think it's easy as a clinician, I've done it, to use a modality to avoid the intimacy.
Yeah.
Just like I could use religion or recovery, 12-step recovery, or something else to actually avoid intimacy. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. But if
Hmm.
I'm uncomfortable with moment to moment connection, slowed down, really felt, if it starts to make me uncomfortable, which for many of us it does, because it didn't feel comfortable growing up. So
Right.
if connection and intimacy felt risky, dangerous, if I never knew when someone might blow up around me or things like that, I couldn't just relax into it. So as an adult, it's going to be hard too. Many people have that experience, including me. So I think that it's important for especially new clinicians, and that's what we really try to work with them in my practice, is to become, always encouraging lifelong learning, but not as a way to avoid the basic thing, which is to like really slow down and to feel into where the client is and to be present
Mhm.
with them moment to moment.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And if you just think about it, any time that you might feel uncomfortable with silence, that would be a great example of, you know, um, going for an approach or a tool or technique instead of just sitting in that what might be an awkward or uncomfortable moment, but that is the true intimacy that can be
Right,
created.
right,
Yes, and I love this. I have a group practice, and I work with a lot of students who are, finishing their internship or newer therapists, and this is where it gets really fun to help other people become therapists that can work with anybody.
Right, 100%. And one example, and I love the internship program that you have, and it's like
Thank you.
um, it's such a wonderful way to teach new people, how to take what they're drawn to for whatever personal reasons and professional reasons, and to really become such an excellent therapist. And I had a group of new graduates who I hired into my practice a number of years ago, and we have a lot of groups, probably around like 12 groups a week through the practice.
Hmm.
So they were all starting to do like exercises with their groups. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. It was about them not being able to sit with the group and let the group process feelings, right? They felt,
Yeah.
they're nervous, they're fearful. Am I doing my job right? I don't know. I totally get it. And so I actually made a rule at the beginning they could only do one exercise a month with the group because I wanted them to practice for themselves, but also to teach the group, especially at our practice. So much of the group, they may be coming around a certain topic, but it's about intimacy. That's why we have so many groups. And so we wanted them to learn how to sit with the clients in a group format in an intimate way and help, and that would help the clients process and get the most out of group therapy.
Mhm. Yeah.
But they were nervous, like, what do I do? What if it's quiet? What do all of that stuff
Right.
that you mentioned.
Right. And that goes back to the body. Okay, notice that you're nervous.
Yeah.
This would be a great time to share a little bit about how you structured and created your therapy group practice through the lens of intimacy. And um, it's really fascinating to me. So I'd love if you tell us about it. Plus, it's in New
Yeah,
York.
sure. Oh, yeah. No, and also we're all of us who are group practice owners for the most part. I find, it's something relatively new.
Mhm.
Last for some people, last 1 to maybe 7 years. I think for many group practice owners, I think the pandemic impacted that somewhat. Um, and I think we're all figuring it out as we go. I belong to
100%.
yeah, I belong to two groups of group practice owners who meet once a month because they didn't teach us any of this stuff in school. And
Right.
whether it's like legal compliance issues or staff management, like
Mm.
the thing, or the best way to set things up to help clients, like there's just so many aspects of it. Um, and it's enjoyable. So, I mean, this is a second career for me, like you mentioned. I taught um, for 20 years, primarily middle school,
Middle
seventh
school. That's
seventh grade.
amazing. That's
And
amazing.
I didn't, and after about 20 years, and I was teaching in private schools in very wealthy areas, the combination of, I think, a little burnout and the entitlement in the communities I was teaching, I was just feeling like I think I didn't, I'm running towards the end of my career in it. And I went back to school and got this degree, a master's in social work, and eventually started my own practice. Um, and over a few years, hired one, two people, and then right before the pandemic, maybe a few more. And so in the first year of the pandemic, which was, it's sometimes hard to remember how scary that was for
Oh my
everybody,
gosh. It
right?
was,
Like, and
yeah,
isolating, and we were all like, what is going on?
right. And
And still
and
thinking it, yeah,
we saw what was happening in New York City and other big cities, and
yeah,
some of us in more, smaller populated areas were much more, like isolated from some of that. It's
yeah.
terrifying.
Yeah, where we lived at the time when it started was in downtown Manhattan, and
Wow.
we would hear sirens all day long. And you could see them out our window going through Brooklyn and Queens. It was scary. And in an apartment building, um, where you have to share elevators with people. We had a 48 floor apartment building. There are
Wow.
thousands of people in our building. And so like the exposure, the fears of exposure when we didn't get, people were already still dying. Um, we eventually left the city because I wanted to just have more space and be outside also. And I remember I went down to North Carolina and I got out of my car, I drove down there, and they weren't wearing masks yet because it hadn't
Mhm.
reached there. Like it wasn't even like a political issue yet. It was so new.
Right.
It was like, in fact, I forgot, and I just walked into a store like, whoa, I didn't even wear my mask. Like no one had died yet in North Carolina from COVID. but
Oh my
I already
gosh.
knew people who had passed away. So it was a really
Mm,
scary time. And group supervision became, we have a 2 hour a week group supervision in the practice. It's mandatory. And it became so important of a way to connect because we were no longer in the office together. And we were in these like corners of New York State, um, and isolated. A lot of the people were
isolated.
living by themselves in their apartments. So they had very little contact. So it became like a weekly thing that felt really good to connect. And our needs continued to grow because the pandemic, created a stress that for most of us, including myself, that was really hard. And
Yeah.
so, need for mental health. I mean, we're either talking to people who know about it because they're clinicians, or people who probably just know about it. But the need for mental health grew. So the need to hire more people grew. And I thought to myself, I don't want to just keep hiring and watering down this intimate connection in group supervision. We had, I think, 6 people in the
Right.
practice. And I thought if I just keep hiring based on the need for business, I'm going to dilute the intimacy in group supervision
Hmm.
and the connection that they feel towards each other. So it got to be like around early 2021, and it was a little easier. People were like, the risk had gone down. Like maybe the vaccines had come out, I don't remember, but people were now socializing again in pods, like
Yes.
a group of people that you committed to, like you're not going to break the trust,
Yeah.
and this small group of people. And I thought, oh, I could do that with my business. So I hired, instead of hiring, my
Mm.
sister actually suggested to me, she's like, don't just hire one, hire a whole staff. So I duplicated what I had into a second staff that was like two, like parallel tracks.
Hmm.
And I created 2 group supervisions so they each had a small, intimate group supervision experience. So they got to know a small group of therapists, each in their own group, and they got individual attention in group supervision. So it wasn't like
Amazing.
15, 20
Right.
people in the same supervision group where people could pull back and hide and be quiet and feel also
Yeah.
not prioritized. So like the lens of intimacy drove how I structured the practice and having those 2 different supervision groups. I
Hmm.
also would say that I spent some time in the pandemic thinking about like what do I really like to do professionally in this profession, like several months, like really sitting
Right.
with it. And I came up with 3 things, which also drove how I built the practice. And it was one, working with clients. Like
Hmm.
that's really why I came in the field. Um, 2, teaching, because I had been teaching, but so
Yeah.
this was teaching new graduates or new staff was a new way to do that instead of teaching like in college, which is fine also, or going like I had in middle school. And then I like the creativity of developing business ideas that I think would be appealing to people to bring them in to get
Hmm.
clinical help. So the other, I got intimate with myself to figure out what I want to do business wise, and the things and I also got clear on what I didn't like to do.
Yes.
Like paperwork, taxes, um, consultations. I used to do every consultation. As I
Hmm.
got busier, I wasn't doing a good job of them, and I felt frustrated by it, and I felt stressed. So like I hired someone to do the consultations. I farmed out this job. So I got intimate with myself, not just like what do I want to work on internally, like spiritually or self-development wise, but what I
Right.
want business wise, and what
Right.
do I not want business wise. And that helped me structure my practice. And then wanting to continue that sense of intimacy for everybody's experience, all the staff's experience, when they had small groups. And then I could no longer handle both supervision groups. And also, I wanted everyone to have a third hour, 2 hours of group supervision, and a third hour of individual supervision. So I hired a clinical director so that we could give them
Hmm.
that too, because I couldn't do it any longer.
Yeah.
And she's just been such a gift, our clinical director. So I
That's
want,
really
yeah,
generous support of your
yeah.
staff too. So generous. Yeah.
And it also ensures, hopefully, a quality of therapy for all of our clients, because also didn't want to be like a therapy mill,
Hmm.
like a
Yeah.
practice
Yeah.
that basically plug and play and like, oh, like I really wanted the staff to be quality staff and to um, continue to learn how to be therapists.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so important. I really respect the way also it's your values that kind of drove the development of the practice, the value of intimacy, the value of therapists who will also hold this and want to show up and take those risks to be
Right.
intimate, to grow in their personal life, their professional life. Um, and if you go to his website, intimacyrecovery.com, and look at our team, it's amazing. Such a beautiful, diverse team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just amazing. Like it just made me smile to see everybody.
It
Yeah.
makes me smile too. It makes me smile too because each one of them are just, they're a whole world, like every person,
Hmm.
and they bring so much different and unique perspectives to their work. So I still assign every consultation that comes in. I don't do them, but based on the notes of the person, the feel of what they wrote, I still suggest who on the staff they should see because I know the staff, and they're wonderful. I mean, they are the practice,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
and to
Wow.
be, and I'm not the best interviewer. Maybe if I did a podcast, I'd get some practice, and thank God our clinical director does the real interviews. But when I
Hmm.
interview someone to come work here, I kind of do what we were talking about. How do they feel?
Hmm.
Because that's what the client's going to experience. The client isn't going to know where they went to grad school, what their GPA is, where their trainings are. What does it feel like? And so that's really all I'm scanning for. I mean, other things show up, but that's my primary thing. And so thank God gives us such a beautiful staff.
Hmm. Yes, that's amazing. And with your structure, then you offer all kinds of therapy, individual therapy, couples therapy, group therapy,
Yeah.
even like not excursions, but like
Intensives.
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 Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. We do. We've also kind of done excursions too, not field trips like to the zoo or anything like that, like you might in school, but we've had two trips, like retreats. They were excursions to Mexico. So we did do something like that too.
Hmm. Yeah, amazing. That's so great. Um, so we have this intimacy lens that's underlying the group practice formation and how you work with clients. Um, One thing that we didn't really talk about, and um, I'm just, I think it's helpful because we overlook it in ourselves and then sometimes in our clients. And I know it's kind of basic, but that notion of, with our parts and the way we create our obstacles to intimacy, the way we avoid intimacy, and the range of intimacy avoidant behaviors. You speak to that
Yeah.
so beautifully. And like, maybe you can just talk a little bit about what are some of these behaviors, just like naming them, because it really
Hmm.
helps us work with ourselves and our clients.
Yeah. I think anything can be an intimacy avoidant behavior depending on
Hmm.
my intention, right? Um, we as kids, life can be hard even in the best family in the best community. I saw it all the time as a teacher. Kids, they're all trying to figure out and survive in school,
Yeah.
and people's feelings get hurt intentionally and unintentionally, and sometimes in family dynamics also. So we develop these protective strategies to protect our hearts. It's smart, and we almost always make the best decision of the moment.
Mm.
It may later evolve into something that like is maladaptive, but normally it's an adaptive decision that everyone makes like one of the best decisions they can. Like, so somebody might decide to become a super student because then their mother or father see them better, or they get praise at school if they're not getting it at home. That's a really smart adaptive strategy. Other people might grow into being the class clown and they get seen that way, and it brings them what they need. Smart adaptive strategy. Somebody might be the rebel, like become like, push back and disobey and break the rules in school, and I mean, all those the stereotypes of those kids in the Breakfast Club, right?
Right.
Which, by the
Probably
way, what's his name?
describing everybody's family. I'm thinking about my family.
Yeah, and what's his name? I think, right? Judd Nelson is from Portland, Maine.
He's
Judd
from
Nelson from the
Maine,
Breakfast Club.
Falmouth,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Maine.
yeah.
Yes.
Found, yeah. So we were just talking about Maine before the podcast
Yeah,
started.
we
That's
both
why.
have connections to Maine.
But I mean, that movie is such a great example of like strategies. Each one of those kids, whether it's jocks or rebel or angry or shut down or, academic, like they were all ways that each kid was trying to figure out just how to be okay,
Yeah.
how to be seen. And so as we grow into adulthood, some of those adaptive strategies work for us in some areas, but they may create problems in intimacy. So one example I'll take one that I think is, very common. I've struggled with it. It was like working hard was an
Me
adaptive
too.
strategy. If you're a group practice owner, if any group practice owner should probably identify with that one, probably.
Yes, right.
Yeah. But it worked well. Excelling at work, working hard. You get praise from, and some people get money from, depending on your industry or profession, but it feels satisfying that people, so it's even praiseworthy. And then it may get in the way of my intimate relationships.
Right.
Starting with myself, like if I'm busy, 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 I don't have time to really connect to myself. But then I also, maybe I'm busy doing work and I'm not home, and I'm in the office and I'm not home with my family. Or even when I'm with them nowadays, I could be on my phone working, but not really present. And I learned this back in 2007. I used to think at that time I was working in education. This before this, and I thought,
Mm.
well, I work so hard because I'm in education. They don't pay enough. So I taught at a school during the day. Afterwards, I tutored a couple of kids. I ran a youth department at a synagogue. So I was like
Wow.
running around, and I eventually took a job in 2007 that allowed me to work basically 9 to 5 and a few hours on the weekend, Saturday mornings, running a program. And I had to go back to therapy. All my stuff came up when I slowed
Yeah.
down.
I bet you got so anxious.
All the things that the busyness was pushing down, all the
Right.
feelings, all the historic
Hmm.
stuff now
Hmm.
came back up. So
Yeah.
that's an example. There's nothing wrong with work. It's actually really important.
Right.
But if I'm using it in a way that could have block intimacy, the same thing could be with, um, you know, relationships or sex. And, then that's probably like over 50% of our practice, which is people who are using sex and in an unhealthy way that avoids intimacy. It's exactly that thing I described before of like they're seeking intimacy while also avoiding it at the same time.
Hmm.
Because even if it's like acting out sexually and like a hookup or something like that, it may not be giving them the intimacy they want, but that's what they're seeking. It's denying them the real intimacy that they want. So people, it's a normal desire to want to be desired, to want to be attracted by someone, to feel attraction. It feels good in our bodies, all of that stuff. And so people use it as a way to sometimes even regulate their emotions. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. But when it then becomes a way that blocks my ability to stay present to myself or hurt others, so now it's gone from being adaptive to maladaptive.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And the way we could, instead of being judgmental, get curious about it. Like, okay,
Correct.
right? I use my work and my busyness, to compensate for anxiety or something else like that, right? So how could I get curious about that? Or what am I avoiding by instead turning to a task? Similarly, with that, um, seeking closeness or proximity, but then also wanting distance. That's
Right.
another really important way that we can look at attachment. We can look at intimacy, and whether it's in emotional intimacy or sexual intimacy, we see that a lot.
Yeah, 100%. And so, like in our groups, for example, we'll put in a group, in our intimacy groups, we'll put someone who is traditionally intimacy avoidant, like they can't get to a first date. They're at home watching Netflix all the time. Like a stereotypical person who's like not socializing. They'll be in the group, and we'll put someone else in the group who might be going from relationship to relationship
Hmm.
or having sex in a compulsive way that's like self-destructive and also not getting them what they really really want. And it's really to we put that and then everything else on the spectrum, of that intimacy avoidance so that it drives the focus eventually below the behavioral level so that everyone's doing the same thing. Like, how am I avoiding intimacy with myself and with others? Am I just, I may be staying home and not putting myself out there. I may be putting myself out there in a compulsive way, which also avoids it, like, and everything in between. So, I might be in a relationship and using anger to avoid intimacy, or I might be picking my partner apart, like, the character of Jerry Seinfeld on Seinfeld, who always found fault with every woman he dated. That's an intimacy avoidant,
Oh, right.
behavior, because they're always finding fault. So it's like, can't stay with her. She has a funny laugh. Can't stay with her. She has man hands. I can't stay with her. She eats her food weird. All those things were like
Yeah.
causing him to like be alone while he was still yearning to be connected.
Hmm. Oh, that's such a great example. That's such a great example.
I feel like the more I use it, the more I date myself. So I don't, like feel like,
Well, we might have to, give a link for the Breakfast Club because that's pretty dated, but I love that. If you think about everything is an adaptive behavior in that, please go watch that movie again.
yeah, it's a good movie.
Yeah. Um,
So yeah, and that's what you said. So it's an adaptive behavior, and it's not. We don't look at any of those things in a shame-based way. There's such a beautiful line that I read once in a book years ago. It was actually about like compulsive sexual behavior, and it was what was the solution became the problem.
mm,
So sometimes for some people, let's say even the regulatory feel, let's say, of masturbation or feeling desired by another person is a solution to feeling like nobody loves me, I'm undesirable, or I'm uncomfortable in my body. Nothing wrong with that. But then if I end up doing it in a way that's compulsive or secretive and harmful to others, what was the solution becomes the problem. Same thing, let's say if someone
yeah,
starts drinking or using a drug to
exactly.
feel okay. It starts out as a solution, so, and it becomes a problem. So we have to, it's the problem symptoms that bring the people into therapy, but
Hmm.
we have to be like, well, why did they start that in a curious stance? Like you said, like, oh, why did that person start to develop, like seek out substances to feel better? What were they trying to feel better from?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. And one can also hear the like motivational interviewing stance beneath that, right? There are
yeah,
some good things and some not so good things about, this solution, and you're exploring that. And it also had a major function and meaning. And then what's going on even below the surface there, like it's not the drinking, it's the thirst. What is that about?
oh, I like that line. It's not the,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
Did you
stole it
just?
from
That's a
somebody.
great line.
No, that's not mine. I stole
Yeah.
that one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounded pretty very profound. Yeah, 100%. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like, the Richard Schwartz with parts, right? His
Hmm.
approach with addiction is like that part that is doing that, how is it's still trying to help us?
Yeah.
How is it trying to help us? What is it trying to do? Like maybe it's trying to help prevent me from like feeling this horrific pain that exists inside because of something that happened that I don't want to look at. Or maybe it's trying to help me regulate my body when I don't know how to like just be in my body. So it's such a non-shame based approach to
Mhm.
any type of addiction, compulsion, or self-destructive behavior.
Yes. And so you've really also combined these disciplines with addiction and sexuality, healthy sexuality, and then anything else like in the continuum, um, and are looking at it as a, an experience of intimacy.
Correct. So the therapy, like going back to what we were talking about before, actually is part of the healing.
Mm.
Because the relationship with the therapist and having not just a how does it make you feel, check, 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 but a relational experience with the therapist teaches is a safer place, hopefully, to teach the client in an embodied way what intimacy feels like. And I'll tell my clients, like, not if I upset you, but when I upset you.
Mm.
Because if we are going to have a relationship within the structures of therapy, a therapeutic relationship, right? We're not going to be texting in out of the session or like at night, like, oh, how's it going? But it's a structured relationship, but it's still intimate. And actually, it can still be very intimate, even with the structure of the relationship. I'm going to do something that will probably upset you because that's what happens in relationships. Maybe I'm not paying attention. Maybe I make a maybe I misunderstand you and I don't get that and I keep going on. Maybe I make a joke at the wrong moment. Maybe I'm late. Maybe I'm
Mhm.
distracted. I mean, I've done all of those things. And um, the main thing is how we're going to deal with it. So
Yeah.
when I upset you, I want you to tell me because, and for many people, they've never had a place where that's invited,
Yes.
and they're told, "Oh, that's ridiculous," or they're rejected. So if they can have a healing experience, like, and then really slowing that down, well, what was it like when you told me that you were mad at
Mhm.
me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
They've never had a chance, perhaps, to speak up about their experience or being upset or voicing that, or they've never experienced a repair or an apology from another
right,
person in relationship to them. So
right,
that's
right.
huge.
Especially if they grew up in a house when that wasn't done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that the intimacy of that relationship is again part of the healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's so beautiful. Um, I we could keep talking about so many different things, Gary, and I'm aware of the time, but let's see. One thing that I'm really curious about, if you could share for our listeners, would be if therapists want to learn more about how to work with intimacy with their clients, whether it's in um, sexuality, addiction, relational work. What do you suggest? Where should they start?
That's a great question. My gut tells you when you say that is that to say that they should start with themselves.
Mhm.
Like we require all of our staff to be in therapy.
Oh, wow.
Actually, now that I was just brought it to my attention, we're talking about like group practice owner issues. I have to now check and see if that you're allowed to legally require someone to be in therapy. I don't need to know who you see. I don't need to know what you're working on. But I know for me, I I was in therapy on and off for over 14 years before becoming a therapist, and I still say things or move in a way in the session that is I internalized from my therapist over the years. So
Yeah.
um, to know what it feels like from within and to have done that internal work. And I can tell when I meet with someone like to hire or just chatting with them, have they explore that stuff because it feels different when they talk about it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
again, no one's done exploring. No one has to have done X amount of work, but just being in that space. So um, I think and I think the reason I think especially if we're talking about intimacy and sex,
Hmm.
which it's not like some of the other things that we work with clients on that maybe we haven't like if I work with a client who has OCD, I don't have OCD, not my issue. If I work with a client, a couple who got married at 20 and are married now for 40 years, that wasn't my experience. I can still help all these people. I
Hmm.
can still know certain things, but I think intimacy and sex is something we share with all of our clients. I mean, in other words, we have those experiences the same that they are probably, at least most of them. And they're having some form of being sexual beings and also intimate beings. So my comfort level with sex and my comfort level with intimacy is going to impact how I show up for my clients. We get, and I'm sure you've had this, but we get many clients who come to us and say, in my previous therapy, we never talked about sex. Or in our previous couples therapy, it was never discussed. Or we've never talked about intimacy. So it's really important for a therapist to be comfortable and
Hmm.
to know about their own relationship to sex and intimacy to be able to then bring that in. Because, and we all have hangups in both. I mean, what
Exactly.
human
This
doesn't, right? I
this
mean,
this goes back to you can only take your client as far as you've done your own work. And,
yeah,
if you're having some struggles or really stuck in your own sexual relationship or your own sexuality, it's going to be really hard to work openly with another client and help them. And I hear it all the time where couples therapists refer the couple to a sex therapist. Sometimes it's because of specific, like,
right.
sexual issues, but often it's just because, oh, we don't talk about sex.
Right. And it's like, it's almost like a medical model of like, oh, I have to refer someone to a cardiologist or
Yeah.
a, a I don't know, an ENT. It
Hmm.
doesn't work just that way in therapy, I don't think, especially, if it's like a mechanical or a thing that might need just some information. But if it's trauma related or
Yeah.
family of origin related, like
Hmm.
psychodynamically, that's informing the issues around sex, then I think any good therapist should be able to talk about it and help them.
Hmm.
So I think really exploring and knowing your own comfort and discomfort around sex and intimacy. And and also knowing what comes up for you when a session gets really intimate. Like I can
Oh,
tolerate
very good.
if the session really drops into a really intimate moment, and I can tolerate. I have a client, one of my favorite clients, she really struggles making eye contact.
Hmm.
Wonderful woman. For a lot of reasons she hasn't. So we work on it, and it's really, I mean, we all know what it's like to sit and keep eye
Yeah.
contact. That's
Yeah.
not easy. And so she works so hard at it, and I love that about her. But I have to be able to tolerate it too, not just her. And
Right.
I'm grateful that I can, and then slow it down and what's it like. And she
Hmm.
like maybe she blushes or maybe she smiles. It feels good. And
Yeah.
I have to make sure, like, don't make the joke then. Don't do the distraction
Hmm.
thing. Like, is notice in me my pull sometimes to like, let's move on. Let's talk something
Right.
like,
How do we pop out as a therapist? You could pop out with like, oh, I'm going to make a joke, or, just
right,
another way to break it, versus
yeah,
like you were saying, what's it like to look at me and tell me that? Wow.
right. And is it appropriate for me to share what it feels like for me and
Hmm.
to reflect that back to her? Like, I could really feel you at that moment as you really looked at me, and you
Yeah.
felt so open and trusting when you like looked up at me and made eye contact and smiled at me. And it really, I felt really um, good that you felt safe enough to do that, and
Hmm.
I felt really close to you at that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope some therapists are listening to this. It's not a technique. It's just really, maybe it's a little experiential or gestalt, but it's really being right there with them and
Yeah,
sharing a part of yourself. That's using the body or the self of therapist in the purpose of the client and the work.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it makes it hard, I'll just say, to then go from that session or later in the day to work with a client who's all in their head, where the
So
energy
heavy.
is just absent because they're in their head. And that's when, I find myself like, what should I have for lunch? I hope none of these clients listen to this part, but what should I have for lunch? What else do I have to do today? What could I fidget with? I have like a fidget toy here, a little stormtrooper to play with because I need like, I know, but that's again, I being intimate with myself, noticing what's going on with my body that I'm like not as engaged. And sometimes it's my stuff, and I have to look at that. But sometimes it's I'm reacting to the lack of heart-centered
Yeah.
experience that that client is bringing in. And so I know already usually which clients are mostly like that. Like everyone has days on and off, but I have to really push myself to be like, I got to stay focused in this session.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
also, like I moved one client who I love also, but he's very in his head. I moved him out of Friday
Hmm.
because I
That
needed
was
to
for
see
you.
him.
Yeah.
So I could show up for him better
Yes.
because on Friday I was already getting like tired at the end of the week. And I was like, if I really want to show up for him the way I should, I need to see him earlier in the week.
Oh, I love that you
Yeah.
shared that with us, Gary. I
I
do
hope
that
he's,
too. I
I
look at
hope he
my
doesn't listen
calendar and
to this
think
actually.
I think about my, like my energy and what I'm gonna need for each person. And so this is really a thing. Like this is something that also as therapists, you have to know yourself so well and what's gonna be, what's really gonna work for you. That's a way of self-care, even just how you schedule.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And I just have to say, I love that you say, I love this client. I love that client. I love my clients. I say that too. Students are not taught in school that they can love their clients, and I'm constantly trying to re-educate them.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, and this is going to be hard if if there are people who are clients in therapy listening who are not professionals, but there's also clients that bother us,
Hmm.
and to be able to own that and say that it doesn't mean you don't like them, doesn't mean you aren't able to work with them, but to say like this client is really activating me, or this client I'm really struggling with, or this client really pissed me off today, or hurt my feelings, or all these things like that's what group individual or group supervision ideally is for, to be able to learn how to talk these things out. I try to talk about it in front of my staff. They're probably nauseous from it at this point, because I want to model for them, or when
Hmm.
I got fired by a client, I'll share that with
Hmm.
my staff. Like, it
Hmm.
hurts.
Yeah. I
Like,
shared that with a
ow.
supervisee yesterday.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. It happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we could go on and we've gotten pretty vulnerable and shared a lot of emotional intimacy in this conversation. And I'm so grateful to you, Gary, for doing
Um,
that and taking the time out on New Year's Eve day, 2024.
I don't think either of us have work issues to look at.
No, it's too funny. Yeah, we both do. And we're trying to accept those parts and be curious about them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Please share with our listeners where they can find out more about you, Gary, and learn more about your work. And you have an amazing website, you have blogs, you have so much. Share it all with us, please.
Okay, sure. As you mentioned earlier, our website is intimacyrecovery.com. Um, you can learn more about our practice there, but also whether if you're a clinician that wants to talk shop or talk therapy, please email me. I'm more than happy to set up a time to meet online. And if you're um, a person seeking therapy and wants a little guidance and direction, like how to find a therapist, I'm also happy to meet with you and chat with you about it. So for both of those, you can just email me directly at Gary Katz, which is GaryKatz. It's the same. It's probably going to be, if they're listening to this, it's probably written out wherever they're listening. So it's my name, Gary Katz at intimacyrecovery.com. You please, I love to hear from people. It's again going back to connection. So whether it's a colleague to set up half an hour to chat about direction for your career, or
Yeah.
developing a practice, or a question about a client, or whether it's somebody, don't email me for a therapy session, like, but someone seeking a direction to, or suggestions in seeking therapy, I'd be more than happy to set up a time to jump on virtually and meet, and I invite that. I really would love to
Mm.
hear from people.
That's so generous and really being a mentor in this field. And just so grateful for you, Gary, and the work you're doing. And um, can't wait to have you back on because we still have other topics to discuss.
I
So
would love to come back. Yeah, that would be
next
great.
year. Okay, great. Thank you again so much, everybody. Check out Gary Katz's website, intimacyrecovery.com. And I wish you all a great new year if you're listening to it now. And till next week, stay heart centered.